Hello everyone, welcome to the 8th and final episode in this Pete McKee art history series. If you're new to this channel, then thank you for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment and share if you enjoy this video. I'm Ellen, the curator at the McKee Gallery, and today we'll be looking at one of Pete McKee's works of art and we'll discuss its influences. If you're not familiar with who Pete McKee is, then please check out the beginning of our first video, which gives insights into how Pete became an artist and the style he is known for. A link to this video can be found below. For our final episode, we will examine one of Pete's more recent paintings entitled Sheffield Gothic. Painted in 2019, this work is part of the artist's 2020 8 New Paintings exhibition at Sheffield's Millennium Gallery, which was displayed virtually. Sheffield Gothic and the 7 other paintings which comprise this show are a departure for Pete, painted in a style very different to that for which he is known. As discussed in the first episode, since Pete began painting in 2005, his work has mainly featured flat layers of colour, defined by strong black lines, a style rooted within a cartoon aesthetic. Pete particularly references Tintin creator Hergé as one of his influences. However, as we can see when looking at Sheffield Gothic, the artist has moved away from his familiar graphic style. In creating this work and the others in this show, Pete uses a new range of techniques. The black lines delineating figures and objects are gone. Flat blocks of colour are less prevalent, as Pete has employed a more detailed technique involving the use of shade and tone. The 8 works in this exhibition are linked by this new style, rather than by a specific theme, as each painting's narrative differs. However, Pete still examines working-class themes within many of these works, something for which he is well known. Sheffield Gothic was inspired by American artist Grant Wood's painting American Gothic. Before we examine the similarities between these works, let us delve into who Grant Wood was and the style of art he produced. Born a few miles outside the small town of Anamosa in the state of Iowa in 1891, Wood grew up on a farm. When his father died in 1901, his family relocated to the larger Iowan town of Cedar Rapids. Although Wood traveled throughout his life and lived in Chicago for a few years, he spent most of his life in Cedar Rapids. Grant Wood has been described as a jack of all trades because of his multidisciplinary training. He began studying at the Minneapolis School of Design, Handicraft and Normal Art as soon as he graduated from high school in 1910, studying under Ernest A. Batchelder, who specialized in designing and making tiles. Batchelder championed Art Nouveau design and the arts and crafts movement. As well as studying arts and crafts, Wood worked as a designer at the Carlo Shop, a leading American silversmith, after moving to Chicago in 1913. He later tried to set up his own business as a jewelry designer but was unsuccessful. During his time at the Carlo Shop, he attended evening classes in fine art and still life drawing at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. To help his mother and sister, Wood returned to Cedar Rapids in 1916 but was called away to serve in the army during the First World War. On his return to Cedar Rapids in 1919, Wood worked as an art teacher at a local school until 1925. By this point, he was creating small landscapes painted impressionistically, as well as making metalwork and sculptures which he fashioned from various found materials. Wood's experimentation with the Impressionist style continued when he first travelled to Europe in 1920, arriving in Paris. He returned in 1923 and studied at the Académie Julian, established in 1868 by Rodolphe Julian. This school was extremely important as it became an alternative to the École des Beaux-Arts, which dated back to 1648. By the end of the 19th century, the École des Beaux-Arts had become particularly conservative. It was also in Paris that Wood's first exhibition took place in 1926. Wood abandoned his loose Impressionist style when he was commissioned to create stained glass windows for the Cedar Rapids Veterans Memorial Building in 1927. In 1928, he travelled to Munich to oversee the window's creation and became interested in the Neue Sachlichkeit movement, translated into English as New Objectivity. This movement developed during the 1920s and 30s in Germany and reflected the cynical post-World War I mood. Moving away from avant-garde ways of making art such as the expressionist Die Brücke group, instead, the Neue Sachlichkeit favoured realism and used exceptional attention to detail to create work which was socially satirical. Gustav Hartlaub coined the term Neue Sachlichkeit and described the work by artists working in this style, such as George Grosz and Otto Dix, as having retained or regained their fidelity to positive, tangible reality. This movement was inspired by Northern Renaissance art, also known for its attention to detail. Wood's American Gothic was inspired aesthetically by the Neue Sachlichkeit movement. It was first exhibited at the Art Institute of Chicago in 1930 and is still part of the gallery's permanent collection. The painting won Wood a prize of $300, but more significantly, it quickly garnered the artist fame. Wood continued to paint in this style, referred to as regionalism, a term which described art that mainly depicted scenes in Midwest America. Like the Neue Sachlichkeit movement, regionalist art, which developed at the beginning of the 1930s, rejected avant-garde styles popular in Europe at the time. Regionalist artists opted to paint homely small-town scenes and was often patriotic, as it attempted to create a completely American genre, focusing often nostalgically on rural scenes. As well as continuing to create art, Wood co-founded the Stone City Art Colony and art school based in Iowa. Although the community was not long-lasting, it attracted and galvanized many young artists from the Midwest. In 1934, Wood became the assistant professor of fine art at the University of Iowa. He died in 1942 from liver cancer, around the time the university was shifting away from regionalism and moving towards modernism, with abstract expressionism soon to become popular in the mid-1940s. Having briefly discussed Wood's life, we will now return to American Gothic. This work exemplifies the regionalist style, depicting a rural American scene. The painting is set in Eldon, a small town in the south of Iowa. The White House in the background with its Gothic pinnacle, which still stands to this day, caught Wood's eye when he was visiting Eldon. The house is designed in the Carpenter Gothic style, exemplified by the Gothic-style window at the top of the house. This architecture became popular in North America during the late 19th century, incorporating Gothic elements to wooden structures. Wood sketched the house and finished the painting at his studio in Cedar Rapids. The painting is ambiguous as it is unclear who the characters are. Is this a couple, a father and a daughter, or a brother and sister? To this day, their relationship is still unclear. Interestingly, Wood's sister Nan and his dentist, Dr. B. H. McKee, posed for this work. We assume the man on the right is a farmer because he holds a pitchfork, the shape of which is humorously mirrored on the front of his shirt. Although this painting comes under the regionalism genre, defined by its American themes and often patriotic content, this pitchfork detail in the man's shirt gives the work a surreal quality. The strange atmosphere is also contributed to by the odd, uncomfortable and rigid poses of the couple, leading us to question the motive behind the work. It is possible that Wood was making a cynical or satirical comment with this painting. Perhaps the artist is suggesting that wholesome America is not all it's cut out to be. The couple certainly do not seem to be happy, evidenced by their tight lips and frosty and distant demeanours. The man stares out at the viewer, his pose stiff and defensive. His pitchfork is held firmly in front of him in what could be interpreted as a protective grasp, perhaps warning the viewer to come no further. The woman on the left, who stands slightly behind him, is also rigid, her expression and slightly furrowed brow indicating unhappiness or dissatisfaction. It has been suggested that the loose strand of hair that falls from her otherwise neat hairdo and the brooch pinned at the base of her throat could indicate a repressed sensuality. As discussed, Wood became interested in Northern Renaissance art when staying in Germany. Jan van Eyck is one of the most famous painters associated with this genre. One of his best-known works, the Arnolfini portrait, is housed in London's National Gallery. Although this work has been part of the National Gallery's collection since 1842, it is very likely that Wood would have seen a reproduction, as there appear to be similarities between Wood's composition and the equally unusual and stiff poses of the couple in the Van Eyck painting, which, like American Gothic, is in many ways elusive. The surreal strangeness of Wood's painting was one of the main reasons Pete was drawn to it. Although Pete has taken influence from the composition and the title of the work, it was the intrigue and the questions around this painting that initially captured his interest. I took inspiration from this specific painting, not just because of its iconic composition and content, but also because I like the fact it's a lie, that it's misleading you. Although it appears to be a couple outside their home, we now know this scene has been manufactured by the artist, which is what gives the work such an intriguing and odd quality. I don't believe that it's the artist's job to depict real life, as when you're holding a paintbrush, pencil, or whatever you choose to make a mark with, you can create anything you want, especially things based outside reality. Sheffield Gothic is unusual and stands out within Pete's body of work for several reasons, principally because this is the first self-portrait the artist ever created. Although Pete's work is often autobiographical, referencing his own experiences, in particular childhood memories, he has never directly portrayed himself. This is also the case regarding the figure on the left, a portrait of the artist's wife, Jane McKee. Jane has been Pete's muse since he first began painting, and many characters have been inspired by her, yet until now she has never been directly portrayed. Pete has painted himself and Jane in front of one of the many old industrial buildings in Sheffield's Kelham Island. Jane holds a coffee cup in her right hand, whilst Pete holds a croissant in his left. The painting echoes American Gothic's surreal quality. It also reflects Pete's observation about the illusory nature of an artist's work. In Sheffield Gothic, Pete comments on how buildings and objects from the past can be repurposed, making way for contemporary activity. Although the building behind them still looks like a factory, Pete comments on how the purpose of many industrial buildings in Sheffield has been transformed, and although their outward appearance may be unchanged, behind the facade these buildings serve a different purpose, evidenced by what Pete and Jane hold in their hands. Our fathers worked in the steelworks of Sheffield and Rotherham and came home smelling of fire, iron and oil. The sweat of their labour built the things we take for granted. Through their aches and pains they filled our plates and we took that for granted. But nothing lasts forever, and that life has gone. Now we sit and marvel at the exposed interior brick walls of repurposed structures that once echoed with the deafening noise of production. These have become the spaces where we wait for our lattes and French pastries that we now take for granted. We hope you have enjoyed this art historical insight into both Pete McKee and Grant Wood's work, and the connection between the two. If you haven't already checked them out, the previous 7 episodes in this series, all of which examine other McKee works and their influences, are available on our YouTube channel. Many thanks for watching.